The grand celestial restaurant floated in space like a giant jewel, its massive windows showing the beautiful blue and green planet below. Tonight was different from every other night. The air felt thick with tension. Everyone who worked there knew why. The Velcair Empire's most powerful ruler was coming for dinner, and one wrong move could start a war between entire worlds. Ryan Mitchell straightened his black tie for the third time and picked up another tray of exotic drinks that glowed softly in crystal glasses. He was 28 years old and had been working at this fancy space restaurant for 3 years now. The money was good enough to pay for his medical school classes during the day. Most nights he enjoyed his job, chatting with travelers from distant planets, learning about their cultures. But tonight his stomach was tied in knots. His manager Gerald cornered him near the kitchen entrance. Gerald was sweating, which was never a good sign. "Ryan, listen to me very carefully," Gerald said in a low, urgent voice. "The Velcair are in Section 7. That's the Imperial Party. I need you to serve them, but I need you to be invisible. Do you understand? Serve the food, fill the glasses, and do not make conversation. Don't smile too much. Don't ask questions. Just do your job and disappear. The Velcair think we're barely more intelligent than pets. One mistake tonight could cause an interstellar incident." Ryan nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. He'd heard stories about the Velcair. They were one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, and they made sure everyone knew it. They looked down on most other species, especially humans. To them, humanity was like noisy children who just learned to walk, stumbling around the galaxy making messes. He grabbed his tray and headed toward Section 7, weaving between tables filled with delegates from a dozen different worlds. Then he saw them and his breath caught in his throat. The Imperial Party had just entered through the main doors, and every conversation in the restaurant died mid-sentence. Empress Zarakai moved like liquid ice, every step perfect and calculated. Her skin wasn't like human skin at all. It looked like living crystal, catching the light and throwing it back in rainbow patterns. She was beautiful in an alien, intimidating way that made you want to look away but couldn't. Her entourage surrounded her, guards in dark armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But Ryan's attention drifted past the Empress to someone else. A young woman walked at Zarakai's side, and she moved differently than everyone else. Floating devices surrounded her, mechanical assists that hummed softly as they supported her movements. She walked slowly, carefully, each step requiring visible effort and concentration. This had to be Princess Lyria. Ryan had overheard diplomats talking about her in whispers. The daughter the Empress kept hidden away. The Velcair valued physical perfection above everything else. Any deviation from their ideal was considered a genetic failure, a source of deep shame. Whatever condition Lyria had, it made her practically invisible in her own empire. Ryan had heard she rarely appeared in public, kept locked away in the royal ship like a secret no one wanted to acknowledge. As Ryan approached their table with his tray, he studied the princess more carefully without trying to be obvious about it. She looked young, maybe 20 at most. Despite the obvious difficulty she had moving, her eyes were bright and alert. They darted around the restaurant with curiosity and wonder, taking in everything like someone seeing the world for the first time. The Empress and her advisors began discussing trade agreements in their language, which sounded like wind chimes and bells. Ryan didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone. Business, politics, the usual boring stuff powerful people talked about at expensive restaurants. But Lyria wasn't paying attention to any of that. She was watching the other diners with an expression that made Ryan's chest ache. He served their first course with practiced efficiency, placing plates of exotic food in front of each diner with silent precision. The Empress barely glanced at him, giving a small nod of acknowledgement that felt more like dismissing a servant than thanking one. Ryan turned to leave, already thinking about his next table. That's when he saw what Lyria was watching, and something inside him broke. Across the restaurant, a human family was having dinner. A father, mother, and their daughter who looked about 8 years old. The little girl had convinced her father to dance with her. The restaurant played soft music in the background, nothing fancy, just pleasant melodies to set the mood. The father laughed and pulled his daughter onto the small open area of floor, spinning her around. The girl's laughter rang out clear and bright, full of pure joy. Other diners smiled, watching the sweet moment. But it was Lyria's expression that stopped Ryan in his tracks. She stared at that dancing pair with such raw longing that it physically hurt to see. Her fingers twitched slightly in her lap, trying to mimic the movements of the dance. Her lips moved soundlessly, humming along with the music that played overhead. It was the look of someone who'd spent their entire life watching other people live while being forced to stay on the sidelines. Ryan delivered meals to 3 more tables, made small talk with a diplomat from the Centauri systems, refilled water glasses and cleared empty plates. But his mind never left that image of Lyria watching the dancers. He'd seen that expression before during his medical school rotations at the hospital. Patients who'd given up hope. People who believed they'd never experience normal joys. Children in wheelchairs watching other kids play. That look of quiet desperation mixed with resignation. Something about Lyria's situation bothered him deeply. She was surrounded by luxury, protected by the most powerful military in the galaxy, daughter to an empress who controlled hundreds of worlds. But she was also completely alone. Isolated by her own family's shame. Hidden away because she didn't fit their definition of perfection. What kind of life was that? What kind of message did that send? That if you weren't perfect, you didn't deserve to be seen? Ryan thought about his grandmother who'd raised him after his parents died. She taught him to waltz in her tiny kitchen, standing on his feet when he was 5 years old. She told him that dancing wasn't about being good at it. It was about connection, about sharing joy with another person. The best dance, she'd said, is the one where you forget you're dancing and just feel happy to be alive with someone you care about. He made his decision right then, even though his brain screamed that it was stupid and dangerous and could get him arrested or worse. But he'd spent too many years watching people suffer in silence, watching them shrink themselves to fit into boxes other people made for them. He couldn't walk away from someone so obviously desperate for a moment of connection, a moment of being treated like they mattered. Ryan walked back to the Imperial table. The advisors stopped talking. The Empress's eyes fixed on him with the intensity of a predator spotting potential prey. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every single person in the restaurant was now watching. You could have heard a pin drop. Ryan ignored all of it. He ignored Gerald frantically waving at him from across the room. He ignored the guards whose hands moved toward their weapons. He ignored the voice in his head screaming that this was career suicide at best. Instead, he looked directly at Princess Lyria and gave her his warmest, most genuine smile. "Your Highness," Ryan said, his voice steady despite his heart hammering in his chest like it was trying to escape, "would you honor me with a dance?" The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The Empress rose slowly from her chair, and the fury radiating from her felt like standing too close to a star. Her guards stepped forward, their weapons charging with a sound like electricity building before lightning strikes. Ryan stood his ground, still looking at Lyria, still offering his hand. And in that frozen moment, with the fate of who knows what hanging in the balance, Princess Lyria looked up at him with eyes full of tears and hope and fear all mixed together. Gerald practically flew across the restaurant floor, his face white as paper. His hands shook as he tried to put himself between Ryan and the Imperial table. "Your Majesty, I apologize deeply. This employee will be terminated immediately. Please accept my humble..." "Please, Mother." The voice was so soft that Ryan almost didn't hear it. But everyone else did. Every head in the restaurant turned toward Princess Lyria like she just shouted. In the deadly silence, Ryan could hear her breathing fast and shallow, the way people breathe when they're terrified but trying to be brave anyway. Lyria looked up at her mother with an expression that held years of unspoken words. Her hands trembled in her lap. "Please let me," she said again, louder this time but still shaking. "Just this once. Please." Empress Zarakai stood frozen like a statue carved from ice. Her crystalline face showed no emotion, but something flickered in her eyes that Ryan couldn't quite read. Was it anger? Surprise? The guards remained tense, waiting for orders that could mean Ryan's life was about to end very badly. Gerald looked like he might faint. Other diners watched with a mixture of horror and fascination, like witnessing a transport crash in slow motion. The moment stretched out forever. Ryan's heart pounded so hard he thought everyone must be able to hear it. He kept his hand extended toward Lyria, trying to look calm and confident even though his knees felt weak. This was it. Either the Empress would order him arrested or something else would happen. He honestly had no idea which was more likely. Then something changed in Zarakai's expression. It was subtle, so small that most people probably missed it. Her eyes moved from Ryan to her daughter, really looking at Lyria maybe for the first time in a long while. Whatever she saw there made her shoulders drop just slightly. When she spoke, her voice was still cold but not quite as frozen as before. 2 minutes, human, the Empress said, each word sharp as broken glass. Do not make me regret this mercy. Ryan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He approached Lyria slowly and carefully, the way his medical instructors had taught him to approach patients who were scared or in pain. He knelt down beside her chair so they were at eye level. "Hey," he said gently, quiet enough that only she could hear. "I'm going to adapt to you, okay? No fancy steps, no pressure. We'll just sway to the music a little bit. You lead as much or as little as you want. This is your dance." Lyria's hover supports adjusted automatically as Ryan helped her stand, providing stability while still allowing movement. Her hand felt tiny and fragile when she placed it in his, shaking like a leaf in wind. Up close, Ryan could see how much effort every small motion cost her. Her muscles fought against what her mind wanted them to do. But he could also see fierce determination burning in her eyes, the kind of strength that had nothing to do with physical ability. The music playing overhead was gentle, something slow and sweet. Ryan began to move, keeping everything small and smooth. He didn't try anything complicated. Just a simple side-to-side sway, barely more than rocking back and forth. At first, Lyria was stiff as a board, her whole body rigid with fear and self-consciousness. Her steps were uneven. Her balance was uncertain. She kept apologizing under her breath every time she stumbled. "Hey, listen to me," Ryan said softly, keeping his voice warm and encouraging. "There's no right way to do this. Where I come from on Earth, we have a saying. Dancing isn't about perfection. It's about joy. It's about being in the moment with someone else. Feel the music. Don't think about all those people watching us. Don't worry about getting steps right. This moment belongs to just us. Nobody else matters." He kept talking in that same gentle tone, telling her random stories about learning to dance as a kid. About his grandmother teaching him to waltz in her kitchen while cooking dinner. About school dances where everyone was awkward and clumsy and nobody cared because they were all having fun together. About how dancing was really just another way of sharing happiness with another person. Gradually, slowly, Ryan felt Lyria start to relax. Her death grip on his hand loosened a little. Her movements stopped fighting against themselves and started flowing more naturally. She still couldn't move the way most people could. Her steps remained limited and uncertain. But she stopped trying to force her body to do impossible things and started working with what she could do. They swayed together to the music, nothing fancy or impressive. Just two people moving in simple rhythm. To any professional dancer, it would have looked basic and unimpressive. But to Lyria, it must have felt like flying. The careful mask she'd been wearing crumbled away, replaced by something real and raw and beautiful. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. Really smiling. Not the polite expression trained into royalty but genuine joy that lit up her whole face. She laughed, a sound of pure delight that carried across the silent restaurant. Some of the other diners found themselves smiling too, touched by something they couldn't quite name. At her table, Empress Zarakai watched her daughter with an expression that shifted and changed like clouds passing across the sun. The cold hardness remained, but underneath it something else flickered. Perhaps she was seeing what Ryan saw. A young woman not defined by her limitations but shining despite them. Or maybe she was remembering when Lyria was small, before the court's judgment and shame had built walls around them both. The song ended far too soon. Ryan wished he could make it last longer, give Lyria more time in this moment where she was just a person dancing, not a hidden princess or a shameful secret. But the music faded to silence and reality came crashing back. He helped Lyria back to her seat with the same careful attention he'd used to help her up. Made sure her hover supports were positioned correctly. Checked that she was comfortable. She looked exhausted like she'd just run a marathon, her face flushed and breathing heavy. But she also looked more alive than she probably had in years. Lyria grabbed his hand before he could step away, holding it with surprising strength. Her eyes locked onto his with fierce intensity. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me. Not the princess. Not the disability. Not the problem everyone wishes would go away. Just me. The real me. Nobody's done that in so long I almost forgot I was a real person." Ryan felt his throat tighten. "You were always real," he said quietly. "You were always enough. Don't let anyone tell you different." He bowed to both the princess and the Empress, then backed away from the table quickly before anyone could respond or he could think too hard about what he'd just done. His hands started shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. His legs felt weak. The full weight of the risk he'd taken hit him all at once, making his head spin. Gerald grabbed his arm the second he reached the kitchen, pulling him into the back area away from customers. "What were you thinking?" Gerald hissed, his voice shaking. "That's royalty. They could have you arrested. They could have you killed. They could shut down this entire restaurant and everyone who works here could lose their jobs. Do you understand what you just..." Gerald's communicator buzzed, cutting off his angry lecture. He glanced at the screen and his face went from red with anger to white with fear in half a second. His hands trembled as he read whatever message had just come through. What? Ryan asked, though part of him didn't want to know. The Velcar delegation just sent a request, Gerald said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. They want you to report to their flagship tomorrow morning at 8. Alone. No lawyers, no witnesses, just you. He looked up at Ryan with genuine fear in his eyes. Ryan, people who get summoned alone to Velcar ships don't always come back. Whatever you did out there, I really hope it was worth your life. Ryan felt cold dread settle in his stomach like ice water. The flagship. Alone. That didn't sound like a reward or a thank you. That sounded like the kind of thing that happened before someone disappeared forever. He thought about Lyria's smile, about the joy on her face during those few minutes of dancing. Was it worth it? Would he make the same choice knowing where it led? He looked back through the kitchen door toward the dining room. Through the small window he could see the imperial table. Lyria was talking animatedly with her mother, more engaged and alive than she'd been all evening. The Empress listened, really listened, in a way that suggested something between them had shifted. Yeah, it was worth it. Whatever happened tomorrow, at least he'd given one person a moment of genuine happiness. At least he'd reminded one isolated soul that they mattered, that they deserved to be seen. If that cost him everything, well, some things were more important than playing it safe. I'll be there, Ryan said quietly. 8 in the morning. I'll report to the flagship. Gerald looked at him like he was insane. Maybe he was. But Ryan had learned a long time ago that the most important moments in life were usually the ones that scared you the most. Tomorrow he'd face whatever consequences came from tonight. For now, he'd hold on to the memory of Lyria's smile and hope that somehow, impossibly, this story had a better ending than it looked like heading toward. The shuttle ride to the Velcar flagship felt like the longest trip of Ryan's life. He sat alone in the small passenger compartment, staring out the window as the massive warship grew larger and larger against the black canvas of space. His stomach twisted into knots tighter than any he'd felt before. This wasn't nerves about a test or a job interview. This was genuine fear about whether he'd survive the next few hours. The flagship was terrifying to look at. It stretched for miles in every direction, a floating city made of crystal and dark metal. Sharp angles jutted out at odd places like the teeth of some massive predator. Weapon arrays covered its surface, each one capable of destroying an entire city back on Earth. The hull itself seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it, making the ship look like a hole torn in space itself. This was a vessel that had crushed rebellions, destroyed fleets, and brought entire civilizations to their knees over centuries of conquest. And Ryan was flying straight into its heart, alone and unarmed. The shuttle docked with a soft thud that made Ryan jump despite expecting it. The airlock doors hissed open, revealing 2 Velcar guards waiting on the other side. They were massive, easily 7 feet tall, their crystalline skin marked with intricate scars that Ryan guessed were military decorations. They stared down at him with expressions that made it clear what they thought of humans. Their hands rested on weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Neither guard spoke. One simply gestured with a sharp movement that clearly meant follow. Ryan stepped out of the shuttle on shaky legs and did as ordered. The guards walked in front and behind him, boxing him in as they moved deeper into the ship. The corridors of the flagship made Ryan feel tiny and insignificant, which he suspected was exactly the point. Ceilings stretched up at least 30 feet high. The walls were smooth crystal that reflected distorted versions of himself back at him. Everything was sharp angles and cold perfection. Not a single curve or soft edge anywhere. The lighting came from nowhere and everywhere at once, bright enough to see clearly but somehow still making everything look harsh and unwelcoming. They walked for what felt like miles. Ryan tried to memorize the route, counting turns and noting distinctive features, but after the 20th identical corridor he gave up. Every hallway looked the same. If he tried to escape, he'd be lost in minutes. Another intentional design choice, he figured. This ship wasn't meant to have guests. It was meant to have prisoners and corpses. Finally they stopped in front of a set of large doors that looked different from all the others. These had elaborate designs carved into them, patterns that hurt Ryan's eyes when he tried to follow them too closely. One guard pressed his palm against a panel. The doors slid open silently, and the guard gestured for Ryan to enter. Alone. Ryan's heart hammered against his ribs as he stepped through. The doors closed behind him with a sound of finality that made his skin crawl. He was in a large private chamber that was somehow even more intimidating than the corridors. One entire wall was a massive window showing the stars beyond. Furniture that looked both beautiful and uncomfortable sat arranged around the room. And sitting in a chair by that window, backlit by starlight, was Empress Zarakai herself. She didn't turn when he entered. She just sat there, still as a statue, staring out at space. The silence stretched on until Ryan felt like he might scream just to break it. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only a minute, she spoke. "You took a tremendous risk last night, human?" Her voice echoed slightly in the large room, cold and controlled. By all rights of Velcair law, touching royalty without explicit permission warrants execution. Slow execution, designed to serve as warning to others who might forget their place. Ryan's mouth went dry as dust. His palms started sweating. But he forced himself to speak, to not show how terrified he was. "I understand, Your Majesty. But I don't regret it." Now she did turn, moving with that liquid grace that made her seem more like a force of nature than a person. Her alien eyes studied him with an intensity that made Ryan feel like an insect under a microscope. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a chair across from her own. When Ryan hesitated, she added a single word that somehow made everything more unsettling. "Please." That politeness felt wrong coming from her, like a predator pretending to be friendly before striking. Ryan sat carefully on the edge of the seat, ready to bolt if needed, even though he knew there was nowhere to run. The Empress was silent again for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. The cold control was still there, but underneath it Ryan heard something he never expected. Real, raw emotional pain. "Do you have children, Ryan Mitchell?" she asked, using his full name in a way that reminded him she knew exactly who he was. "No, Your Majesty." "Then you cannot truly understand what it means to watch your child suffer every single day and know that you are the cause of that suffering." Her rigid posture began to crack just slightly. She suddenly looked less like an all-powerful empress and more like a tired mother carrying guilt too heavy for anyone to bear. When Lyria was born with her condition, the imperial court was ruthless. The advisors, the nobles, even members of my own family. They called her defective. A genetic failure. A stain on the royal bloodline that had remained pure for 10,000 years. Some suggested very directly that she should be eliminated for the good of the empire. Ryan felt sick. "That's horrible. That's barbaric." "That is Velcair culture," Zarakai said bitterly, and for the first time Ryan heard real emotion break through her controlled facade. "We have spent millennia breeding for perfection. Any weakness, any deviation from the ideal, is seen as dangerous regression. Something to be eliminated before it spreads." She stood abruptly and walked to the window, pressing one hand against the crystal as if she could reach through and touch the stars beyond. "I have spent 12 years hiding my daughter from the universe. 12 years keeping her locked away, telling myself I was protecting her from judgment and assassination attempts. And all that time I was really just imprisoning her. I took away her chance to live, to experience life, to be seen as a person. I stole her childhood and her future because I was afraid." "You were trying to keep her safe," Ryan said carefully, not sure if contradicting an empress was smart but unable to stay silent. "Was I?" Zarakai's voice cracked, the first time Ryan had heard her sound anything but perfectly controlled. "Or was I protecting my own position? My own pride? Keeping her hidden so I wouldn't have to face the judgment of the court? So I wouldn't have to fight every single day to defend her right to exist?" She turned back to face Ryan, and there were actual tears on her crystalline face, catching the starlight like diamonds. "Last night, watching her dance with you, I saw my daughter truly happy for the first time since she was a small child. Before the court's poison reached her. Before she learned to be ashamed of herself. You gave her something I, with all my power and all the resources of an empire spanning 100 worlds, could not provide. You gave her dignity. You treated her like she mattered, like she deserved to be seen and valued just for being herself." Ryan stayed quiet, sensing the Empress needed to get these words out, thoughts she'd probably been carrying alone for years. "I summoned you here to make a proposition," Zarakai continued, her voice becoming stronger and more controlled again. "I want to hire you as Lyria's personal companion and physical therapist. You would help her build physical strength where possible, but more importantly, you would help her build confidence. Help her experience life beyond these prison walls I've built around her. In exchange, I will provide you with unlimited resources to complete your medical education. You will have access to Velcair medical technology that is centuries ahead of human knowledge. Technology that could revolutionize healthcare for your entire species. You would become wealthy beyond anything you've imagined, famous across the galaxy, able to help millions of people." The offer hung in the air between them. It was everything Ryan could possibly want. financial security, access to alien medical knowledge that could change everything, the chance to finish school without drowning in debt. Opportunities most humans would kill for. But it also meant leaving Earth behind. Abandoning his life, his friends, everything familiar. Walking into a culture that hated him, surrounded by people who wanted him dead. Why me? Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You could hire the absolute best therapists from any species in the galaxy. People with decades of experience and advanced degrees. Why choose a waiter who's still in medical school? Empress Zarakai moved closer, looking at him with an intensity that made Ryan want to look away, but he forced himself to hold her gaze. Because credentials and experience mean nothing if you don't have the most important quality. You didn't see a princess when you looked at my daughter. You didn't see a patient or a problem to be solved. You saw a young woman who wanted to dance, who deserved joy and connection just like anyone else. That gift, the ability to see people rather than labels, cannot be taught in any school or bought with any amount of money. She paused, and something shifted in her expression. I want to change Velkair culture. I want to prove that strength comes in many forms, that perfection is a lie that has made us cruel and small. But I cannot do it alone. I need allies who understand what I'm trying to build. And I choose to start by being the mother Lyria deserves rather than the empress the empire demands. Ryan thought about Lyria's face during their dance. That moment of pure, unfiltered joy. He thought about his grandmother's words about dancing being about connection and happiness. He thought about why he'd chosen medicine in the first place, about wanting to help people who were suffering and isolated. This was a chance to do that on a scale he'd never imagined possible. I accept, he said. The relief that washed over Zarakai's face was startling. For just a moment she looked almost human in her gratitude. Thank you, truly. You will begin in 3 days. My staff will handle all arrangements. Ryan stood to leave, but as he reached the door, the Empress's voice stopped him cold. There is one more thing you should know, Ryan Mitchell. Her voice had gone hard again, back to that cold imperial tone. Not everyone in the court welcomes change. My sister, Second Empress Coravel, believes Lyria weakens our dynasty. She has already orchestrated 2 attempts on my daughter's life. By accepting this position, you have just made yourself a target. There are people in this empire who will do anything to stop what we're trying to build. Including killing you. I needed you to know that before you commit fully. Ryan turned back to face her, his decision already made. I understand the risks. I accept anyway. As the guards escorted him back through those endless corridors, Ryan tried not to think about what he'd just gotten himself into. Tried not to imagine all the ways this could go terribly wrong. Instead, he focused on remembering Lyria's smile and telling himself that some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight might cost everything. 3 months living aboard the flagship changed Ryan's entire world. His quarters were surprisingly comfortable, though decorated in that sharp angular Velkair style that never quite felt warm or welcoming. Every morning he woke to the hum of the massive ship's engines, a constant reminder that he was millions of miles from Earth, surrounded by people who mostly wanted him gone or dead. But none of that mattered when he was working with Lyria. Their sessions became the best part of both their days. They'd meet in a large room the Empress had converted into a therapy space, with soft mats on the floor and equipment Ryan had requested. They combined physical exercises with music, conversation, and laughter. So much laughter. Lyria had a sharp sense of humor that had been buried under years of isolation, and watching it emerge was like watching a flower bloom. The changes in her were remarkable. Lyria grew physically stronger, able to stand for longer periods and move with more confidence. But the emotional transformation was even more dramatic. She smiled constantly now. She spoke up during conversations instead of sitting silent. She even started venturing out of her private quarters to explore the ship, something she hadn't done in years. The hidden princess was becoming visible, and not everyone was happy about it. Second Empress Coravel made her hatred crystal clear from the beginning. She was Zarakai's younger sister, nearly identical in appearance but with eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. At formal dinners and court functions, she went out of her way to make Ryan's life miserable. At one particularly tense banquet, Coravel's voice rang out across the great hall loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell me, sister, is it now customary in your reformed empire for servants to dine with royalty? Perhaps next we should invite the maintenance workers and janitor robots to join us as well. After all, if we're abandoning all standards of dignity and tradition, why stop at just one human? Laughter rippled through the assembled nobles. Ryan felt heat rise in his face but kept his expression neutral. He'd learned quickly that showing weakness only encouraged more attacks. These people were like sharks, they could smell blood in the water from miles away. He reached for his water glass and immediately noticed something wrong. The liquid inside was murky and dark, nothing like the crystal clear water that should have been there. It smelled rancid, like something had died and rotted in it. The servant who'd placed it there, a young Velcar with downcast eyes, had already disappeared into the crowd. Ryan set the glass down carefully without drinking. This was the third time this week someone had tampered with his food or drink. Last time he hadn't noticed until after he'd taken a sip, and he'd spent 12 hours violently sick in his quarters. The medical staff had told him it was just a stomach bug. Right. A stomach bug that only affected him and happened to show up right after he ate contaminated food. Before Coravel could continue her mocking, Lyria's voice cut through the laughter. It was strong and clear, carrying authority that shocked everyone into silence. Ryan sits with me because he is my friend and my healer. Anyone who has an issue with that can speak to me directly instead of hiding behind insults and poison drinks. The entire hall went deadly quiet. You could have heard a pin drop on the far side of the massive room. The hidden princess who'd barely whispered in public for years had just defended a human openly, in front of hundreds of nobles and courtiers. She stared directly at her aunt with fierce defiance that suggested she knew exactly who was behind the attacks on Ryan. Empress Zarakai looked at her daughter with visible pride, then turned her gaze to her sister. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. My daughter speaks truth. Anyone with concerns may bring them to me. But they should be prepared to back their words with evidence and reason, not cowardly acts in shadows. Coravel's expression turned to ice. She said nothing more, but Ryan saw pure hatred flash in her eyes when she looked at him. He'd just made a very powerful enemy even angrier, and that was dangerous in ways he was only beginning to understand. The hostility showed itself in countless small ways after that night. Ryan's door access codes mysteriously stopped working one freezing night, leaving him locked out in a corridor where the temperature was near zero. By the time security finally responded to his calls for help, he had mild hypothermia. His personal belongings were searched repeatedly, supposedly for security reasons. Important medical notes he'd taken about Lyria's progress disappeared from his data pad. Once he found a small listening device hidden in his quarters. When he reported it, security told him it must have been left there by accident during a routine maintenance check. Sure it was. Through everything, Lyria remained his closest friend and fiercest defender. She changed so much from the isolated young woman he'd first met. Ryan introduced her to music from Earth, everything from classical symphonies to modern pop songs. He showed her human art and poetry. They spent hours talking about philosophy and what it meant to be truly strong. You know what I love about Earth culture? Lyria said one day during a session. They were taking a break, sitting by the observation window watching stars stream past. You celebrate imperfection. You have entire art movements based on things being broken or flawed. That Japanese thing, what did you call it? Kintsugi, Ryan said with a smile. When something breaks, they repair it with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty instead of hiding them. Exactly. Lyria's eyes lit up with excitement. On my world, anything broken is thrown away and hidden. But humans see the breaks as part of the story, something that makes the object more valuable, not less. I wish more people understood that. That conversation sparked an idea in Lyria. She started designing her own mobility devices, working with engineers to create equipment that was beautiful instead of purely functional. She incorporated traditional Velcar crystal work but added flowing organic lines that celebrated her needs rather than hiding them. When she showed her mother the first prototype, Zarakai actually cried. It was the first time anyone had seen the Empress display such open emotion. But success brought increased danger. Ryan started noticing more guards around Lyria, more restricted areas, more security protocols. Something was building toward a crisis, he could feel it. His instincts were proven right when he stumbled onto evidence of a conspiracy completely by accident. He'd been in a small conference room reviewing Lyria's progress reports when he noticed a data pad someone had left behind. He picked it up to return it to Lost and Found, but the screen was still active, showing a partially encrypted message. Ryan wasn't a hacker, but he'd taken basic programming courses, and he recognized sloppy encryption when he saw it. A simple coding error had left a window of vulnerability. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened the message fully, then immediately wished he hadn't. His blood ran cold as he read through communication between Coravel and at least a dozen high-ranking nobles. They were planning something for the upcoming Unity Summit, a massive diplomatic gathering where delegates from hundreds of worlds would meet to discuss trade and peace agreements. Lyria was scheduled to make her first major public appearance there, A coming-out party of sorts for the reformed princess. The messages were vague but terrifying. Phrases like tragic accident and eliminate the weakness and restore proper order jumped out at him. They mentioned human incompetence and collateral damage and acceptable losses. Ryan didn't need to be a genius to understand what they were planning. They were going to kill Lyria at the summit, probably along with human delegates, and make it look like human error or even human attack. 2 goals accomplished with one strike, eliminating the princess who represented everything they hated while destroying human Velkair relations. Ryan's hands shook as he copied the messages and ran straight to the Empress's private office. He didn't care about protocol or proper channels. Lyria's life was in danger, nothing else mattered. He burst through the doors without announcement, startling Zarakai and her advisors. "Your Majesty, I found evidence. They're planning to kill Lyria at the summit." The room erupted in chaos. Guards were called. The data was analyzed. Zarakai's face grew harder and colder with each message she read. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long time, her fingers pressed against her temples like she had a massive headache. "You understand what this means?" she finally said, her voice carefully controlled. "Coravel commands 3 entire battle fleets. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers loyal to her personally. If I move against her directly without absolute proof that would hold up in imperial courts, I risk civil war. The empire would tear itself apart. Billions would die. So what do we do?" Ryan asked desperately. "We can't just let them." "We cancel the summit," Zarakai interrupted. "We postpone indefinitely while I work through political channels too." "No." Everyone turned. Lyria stood in the doorway. How long had she been listening? Her face was pale but determined, her jaw set in a way Ryan recognized. She'd made a decision and nothing would change her mind. "I'm going to the summit," Lyria said, moving into the room with more confidence than Ryan had ever seen from her. "I'm tired of my life being controlled by fear. Tired of hiding, of changing plans, of letting other people's hatred dictate what I can and cannot do. If they want to kill me for being imperfect, let them try. I'm done being afraid." "Lyria, this isn't about courage," her mother said, her voice cracking with emotion. "This is about survival. They will kill you." "Maybe," Lyria acknowledged. "But Ryan taught me something important. He taught me that real strength means facing your fears, not running from them. You taught me that leaders must sometimes risk everything for what they believe in. Well, I believe in the changes you're trying to make. I believe in a future where people like me don't have to hide. And I won't let the people who oppose that future silence me before I even get a chance to speak." Ryan saw the absolute resolve in her eyes and knew she meant every word. "Then we need a plan," he said. "We need to identify every possible way they could attack and prepare countermeasures for all of them." The next 2 weeks were a blur of frantic preparation. Ryan worked with Lyria's most loyal guards, people who'd sworn personal oaths to protect her regardless of political consequences. They studied layouts of the Unity Summit Station, planned escape routes, arranged for hidden security details. But they all knew the truth. Coravel had resources and support they couldn't match. If she was determined enough, she'd find a way. The night before they were scheduled to leave for the summit, Ryan found Lyria at their usual spot by the observation window. She was staring at the stars with an expression that was both peaceful and sad. "You don't have to do this," Ryan said quietly, sitting beside her. "It's not too late to change your mind. Nobody would think less of you." "I would," Lyria said simply. "I'd think less of me. I've spent my whole life letting fear make decisions for me. Or letting other people's fear make decisions for me, which is really the same thing." She turned to look at him, and Ryan was struck by how much she'd changed in just 3 months. "Thank you, Ryan. For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For teaching me that I'm enough exactly as I am. For being my friend when I desperately needed one. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that you changed my life in ways I can never fully express." Ryan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Hey, we're going to get through this. I promise." "Maybe," Lyria said with a sad smile. "But promises aren't always something we can keep no matter how much we want to. Just know that I'm grateful. And I'm ready. For whatever comes next." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching stars stream past the window. Neither of them saw the shadow that flickered across the doorway then vanished down the corridor. Someone had been listening to every word they'd said, learning every detail of their security plans. The trap was set. Tomorrow would determine if they'd survive it. Unity 7 space station was breathtaking. The massive structure floated in neutral space, a symbol of cooperation between hundreds of different worlds. Every surface gleamed with polished metal and crystal. Flags and banners from countless civilizations hung from the high ceilings. Delegates from across the galaxy filled the Grand Conference Center, their various forms creating an incredible display of diversity. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4 or 6. Some flew, others floated. Languages Ryan had never heard before mixed together in a symphony of different voices and sounds. Today was supposed to be a celebration. A demonstration that different species could work together despite their differences. But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling of dread sitting heavy in his stomach. Somewhere in this crowd of thousands, enemies waited for their moment to strike. Lyria arrived wearing the mobility device she designed herself, and the reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as people turned to stare. The device was absolutely stunning, incorporating traditional Velcair crystal work with flowing lines that moved with her like liquid metal and light. It didn't hide her disability. Instead it celebrated it, turning necessary equipment into wearable art that caught the light and threw back rainbows. Some delegates gasped in shock. Others whispered behind their hands, probably scandalized that the Velcair princess would display her condition so openly. But Ryan also saw expressions of surprise and admiration. Whatever people expected from the hidden princess, it wasn't this confident young woman who held her head high and met everyone's eyes directly. The opening ceremony began with speeches from various ambassadors talking about unity and cooperation. Empress Zarakai gave an eloquent address about the importance of diverse perspectives in solving galactic problems. Lyria sat in the front row, poised and attentive, looking every bit the princess she was born to be. Ryan stood with the security detail near the back, his eyes constantly moving across the crowd, watching for anything suspicious. Everything seemed to be going exactly according to plan. Ryan started to relax just slightly, thinking maybe they'd worried for nothing. Maybe Coravel had backed down. Maybe the threat wasn't as serious as they'd thought. Then the world exploded. The blast didn't hit where anyone expected. Instead of targeting the main conference center where all the important people sat, the explosion ripped through the station's lower level with a force that shook the entire structure. Emergency alarms immediately started screaming. The lights flickered and died, replaced by harsh red emergency lighting that made everything look like a nightmare. But the real horror came seconds later when someone shouted the words that made Ryan's blood freeze. The evacuation bay. The escape ships are gone. Panic erupted instantly. Delegates started running for exits, shoving each other aside in their desperation. Some species' natural fight or flight instincts kicked in, causing chaos as people trampled one another. The station's automated systems began sealing sections to contain the damage, but that just trapped more people inside. Ryan could hear the hiss of air escaping somewhere, could feel the temperature starting to drop. Coravel's plan was more brutal than simple assassination. She trapped everyone on the station like rats in a cage. Now she could trigger a complete system failure, kill hundreds of delegates from across the galaxy, and blame it all on human engineering flaws or terrorist attack. She'd destroy the reform movement and humanity's reputation in one devastating strike. Ryan fought his way through the panicking crowd toward Lyria. People were screaming in dozens of different languages. Someone slammed into Ryan's shoulder hard enough to spin him around. He pushed forward desperately until he finally reached her. Lyria's guards had formed a protective circle, but they looked just as terrified as everyone else. The backup life support system. Ryan shouted over the chaos and alarms. The old auxiliary system in the engineering core. If we can activate it, we can keep everyone alive until rescue ships arrive. One of the guards, a battle-scarred Velcair named Tesh, looked horrified. The engineering core was decommissioned 15 years ago. That entire section is flooded with radiation from old power cores. Anyone who goes in there will be dead within hours. Then we die, Ryan said grimly. But everyone else lives. That's better than all of us dying here. He looked around at the chaos, at delegates being crushed in the panic, at children crying for parents they'd been separated from. I'm going. I need someone who knows the station layout and someone to watch my back. I'm coming with you, Lyria said firmly, her voice cutting through the noise. Absolutely not. Empress Zarakai had appeared beside them, her usual composure shattered by fear. Her hands gripped her daughter's shoulders. You can barely walk in normal conditions. The route will be climbing through damaged sections and... Which is exactly why I need to go, Lyria interrupted, meeting her mother's eyes steadily. Ryan will be working with unfamiliar alien technology in a crisis situation. He'll need someone to help, to problem solve, to watch for things he might miss because he's focused on the technical work. I may have physical limitations, Mother, but my mind works just fine. I can help. She's right, Ryan admitted, even though every instinct screamed to keep Lyria safe. I'll need backup, and Lyria knows Velkai systems better than anyone. Zarakai looked between them, war visible on her face. Finally she nodded, tears streaming down her crystalline features. Then I'm sending Tesh with you. She grabbed both her daughter's hands. Come back to me. Please. They had no time for longer goodbyes. Ryan, Lyria, Tesh, and a human security officer named Donna raced through the failing station. The corridors that had been pristine and beautiful an hour ago were now filled with smoke and debris. They climbed down access ladders meant for maintenance drones, their hands slipping on rungs covered in some kind of leaking fluid. They squeezed through blast doors that had partially sealed, the metal edges sharp enough to tear clothing and skin. Lyria struggled with every physical challenge, but she refused to slow them down. When her mobility device got caught on a piece of twisted metal and wouldn't come free, she didn't hesitate. She just released the straps and let it fall, allowing Tesh to carry her instead. I don't need it, she said through gritted teeth, her face pale with pain and effort. Just get me there. They reached the engineering core after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. The section looked abandoned and dangerous, with old equipment covered in dust and warning signs plastered everywhere. Radiation symbols decorated nearly every surface. And standing in front of the life support control panels as if she'd been waiting for them, was Second Empress Coravel. She looked perfectly calm, almost peaceful, with a weapon held loosely in one hand. I knew you'd come here, Coravel said, her voice echoing in the large chamber. You're all so predictable, you reformers. Always trying to save everyone, even people who despise you and want you dead. She gestured at the control panels behind her. I was planning to activate these systems myself in another 10 minutes. After enough important people died to prove my point, I would have been the hero who saved the survivors. My sister's ridiculous reforms would have died with the victims, and the Empire would have returned to proper order. But you've arrived early and complicated things. You're insane, Donna said, her weapon trained on Coravel. Your own people are dying out there. Necessary sacrifices, Coravel said dismissively, like she was talking about broken equipment rather than lives. The Velkair Empire has grown weak and soft under my sister's influence. This demonstration will remind everyone what we truly are. Superior. Powerful. Willing to do whatever is necessary for the greater good. Her eyes fixed on Lyria with pure hatred. And it all started because of you. The defective princess who should have been eliminated at birth. You've poisoned everything with your weakness. She raised her weapon, pointing it directly at Lyria's chest. But I can still fix this. Starting by removing the mistake that began this whole mess. Everything happened in slow motion and lightning fast at the same time. Ryan saw Coravel's finger tighten on the trigger. He started moving, knowing he'd never reach Lyria in time. But Lyria was already moving too, faster than anyone expected. Despite having no mobility device, despite her condition, she threw herself sideways. Not away from the blast, but positioning herself so that her fallen mobility device, lying on the floor where Tesh had set it down, was between her and the weapon. The energy blast hit the device dead center. The beautiful crystal and metal work exploded in a shower of fragments that filled the air like deadly confetti. The explosion created a temporary shield, giving Ryan the split second he needed. He lunged for the control panels, his fingers already moving across buttons and switches he barely understood. Behind him the room erupted in violence. Tesh and Donna engaged Coravel, weapons fire lighting up the chamber like lightning. Someone screamed. Metal clanged against metal. Ryan forced himself not to look, to focus entirely on the ancient control panel in front of him. The system was completely different from anything he'd trained on. Labels were in old Velkair script he couldn't read. Warning lights flashed everywhere. Nothing made sense. Panic clawed at his throat as precious seconds ticked away. People were dying. The station was dying. And he couldn't figure out how to save them. Left panel? Lyria's voice cut through his panic. She dragged herself to a nearby monitoring station despite being unable to walk. Blood ran down her arm from cuts caused by crystal fragments, but she ignored it completely. The green switches on the left panel. Then the central override, the crystal-shaped slot in the middle. Ryan followed her instructions, flipping switches and pressing buttons. The old system groaned and complained like a sleeping giant being forced awake. Grinding mechanical sounds echoed through the chamber. For a horrible moment nothing happened and Ryan thought they'd failed. Then oxygen started flowing. The emergency seal stabilized. Warning lights began changing from red to yellow. The station's death spiral stopped. They'd done it. The doors burst open and Empress Zarakai rushed in with a full security team. She took in the scene instantly. Her sister being restrained by guards, the activated life support, Lyria collapsed and bleeding beside the monitoring station. Zarakai moved to her sister first, her face harder than Ryan had ever seen it. Arrest Second Empress Coravel for terrorism, attempted mass murder and high treason, she commanded, her voice colder than the void of space. She stared down at her sister, who still struggled against the guards holding her. You called my daughter weak. You said she made our empire vulnerable. Yet she just saved hundreds of lives while you hid behind murder and cowardice. Tell me, sister, which of us understands true strength? Coravel was dragged away still screaming about righteousness and proper order, her voice fading down the corridor. Zarakai knelt beside Lyria, her hands shaking as she checked for serious injuries. Are you hurt badly? Just cuts and bruises, Lyria managed, offering a weak smile despite her obvious pain. No mobility device anymore, so someone will need to carry me. But we're alive, mother. Everyone's alive. For the first time in public, for the first time maybe ever, Empress Zarakai broke down completely. She pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, holding her like she'd never let go, tears streaming down her face. You could have died, she whispered brokenly. But I didn't, Lyria said gently. And I'm done living my life afraid of what might happen. That's not living. That's just existing. I want to actually live. The station was fully secured over the next several hours. Rescue ships arrived to evacuate injured delegates and begin repairs. Coravel and everyone involved in her conspiracy were imprisoned to await trial. And miraculously, despite the violence and chaos, not a single person had died. Ryan and Lyria's quick action had saved them all. The galaxy noticed. Over the following weeks, Lyria's story spread everywhere. Images and videos of the Velkair princess being carried from the engineering core, covered in blood and dust but smiling, went viral across every species' communication networks. The story of a young woman overcoming both physical limitations and cultural prejudice to save hundreds of lives resonated universally across the galaxy. Messages flooded in from everywhere. People with disabilities from dozens of species reached out, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph. Even many Velkair began questioning their culture's obsession with physical perfection. If their princess could show such incredible courage, maybe strength really did come in many different forms. Ryan finished his medical degree using knowledge from both human and Velkair sources. His research on adaptive medicine and inclusive healthcare attracted attention from institutions across multiple worlds. He became a leading voice in his field, helping to design medical systems that considered the whole person rather than just treating them as broken machines to be fixed. 6 months after the summit, Unity 7 held its grand reopening ceremony. The entire station had been redesigned with accessibility as a core principle. Ramps and lifts for species that couldn't climb stairs. Varied atmospheric sections for beings that breathed different gases. Communication systems that worked across different sensory methods. It became a model that other stations across the galaxy started copying. The ceremony drew massive crowds, even bigger than the original summit. Empress Zarakai stood before the assembled delegates and made an announcement that would be remembered in history books for generations. The Velkair Empire is implementing comprehensive new laws, she declared, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. We will protect citizens with disabilities. We will eliminate discrimination based on physical differences. We will recognize that our previous definition of strength was dangerously narrow and fundamentally wrong. Her voice cracked with emotion as she continued. My daughter taught me something I should have learned long ago. Real strength isn't about being invulnerable or matching some impossible standard of perfection. It's about facing your fears, embracing who you truly are, having the courage to live openly and honestly despite judgment. The Velkair Empire has been wrong about so many things for so long. Today we begin the long, difficult process of becoming what we should have been all along. The ceremony ended with music and celebration. The station's central plaza filled with beings from across the galaxy, different species mingling freely, celebrating not just the rebuilt station but the shifts in thinking it represented. Ryan found Lyria near the dance floor. She wore a new mobility device she'd designed, even more beautiful than the one destroyed at the summit. This one incorporated flowing elements that moved with her movements like wings made of light. May I have this dance? Ryan asked with a warm smile. I was hoping you'd ask, Lyria replied, her eyes sparkling. They moved onto the floor together, and this time dozens of others joined them. Humans and aliens, some using various mobility devices, others not. Different body types and abilities all moving together to the music. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. As they swayed together, Lyria leaned close to Ryan. You changed everything, you know. One simple act of kindness started all of this. Ryan shook his head gently. No, you changed everything. I just asked you to dance. You had the courage to say yes. You kept saying yes to life even when it got dangerous and scary. You showed an entire galaxy what real strength looks like. Then we both did our part, Lyria said softly, smiling. And this is just the beginning. There's so much more to change, so many more people who need someone to see them the way you saw me. From a balcony overlooking the celebration, Empress Zarakai stood with her advisors watching the scene below. Do you think it will last? One advisor asked quietly. Real change is difficult. Many will resist. Zarakai watched her daughter dancing, surrounded by beings celebrating together without fear or judgment. She saw Ryan laughing, saw how naturally people gravitated toward Lyria now, drawn by her genuine warmth and courage rather than her title. Yes, the Empress said with absolute certainty. It will last. Because people have seen a different possibility now. They've experienced what life can be like when we embrace each other's differences instead of fearing them. And once you've tasted real freedom and acceptance, it's almost impossible to go back to living in chains. A tear slid down her crystalline face, catching the light. My daughter taught me that. A human waiter taught me that. Together they taught an entire empire that change is possible if we're brave enough to reach for it. The music played on. The dancing continued. And somewhere in that crowd of celebrating beings from 100 different worlds, the future was being written. A future where strength came in many forms. Where differences were celebrated rather than hidden. Where one person's courage to be seen could inspire millions to step out of the shadows. Sometimes revolution didn't start with weapons or political maneuvering. Sometimes it started with something as simple as one person seeing another's humanity and having the courage to reach across the divide. And sometimes that single moment of genuine connection could change not just one life, but an entire galaxy. The stars beyond the viewport shone bright with possibility. The music swelled. And two friends who'd changed the course of history danced together, celebrating not just survival but the beginning of something beautiful and new. Something that would ripple outward across the galaxy for generations to come. All because a waiter saw a lonely princess and asked her to dance.